I'm John Burghauser, and want to take this opportunity today to share a brief testimony with you. And if you have a Bible, I am going to read from the Bible and use the Bible as a guideline. So I would ask you to get a hold of one now, grab one, and flip to Psalm 32. And the reason I want to do that is I think that it can be a help sometimes for us to not just read the Bible and know of the Bible, but actually see ourselves in the same place as some of those who wrote these things that we're reading. This psalm particularly, Psalm 32, is a psalm of David. And you might have heard of David, the one who slew Goliath with the stone, the mighty giant that no one thought could be taken down. And David did that. Well, later in David's life, after he became king, he committed some things that were not good at all. And you can read about them at another time if you like. But in the aftermath of the anguish and the turmoil and the despair that David went through, he wrote this psalm thinking about how, in retrospect, looking back, God was with him and God helped him and God had restored him. If you begin in verse 1, reading with me, and then I'll stop after a few verses and tell you a little bit about how my life fits in. It says, "How blessed is he whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is covered. How blessed is the man to whom the Lord does not impute iniquity, and in whose spirit there is no deceit." That's a picture of my life today. That was David saying today, how blessed is he, because his transgression that he had committed was forgiven. And I can say that as well today, that the things of my past life, I know today God has forgiven them. And the word blessed in the Hebrew, the original word, means to be happy. And so to be happy is the man who knows he's been forgiven, whose sin is covered. The Bible teaches that Jesus shed blood on the cross. If you are familiar with Good Friday, when Jesus died, and Easter he was resurrected, but on Good Friday his blood was shed. And that covered the sin of man and covered my sin as well, and yours as you receive the Lord yourselves. It says that he does not impute iniquity to us. He does not harm us and do bad things. When bad things are happening, they're not coming from God. He doesn't do that to us. And in whose spirit there is no deceit. For me today, I use the phrase, what you see is what you get. There's not a whole lot of mystery to me. I might not be the easiest guy to get to know. It takes a while sometimes because I am quiet, but I can assure you that if you get to know me, you won't see any more than what you see. And the things I've done, I wouldn't be afraid to tell you. I'm not proud of them, but there's nothing hidden there. So having said those couple of verses, that's where my life is today, and I would hope that the listener to this testimony may find themselves in that place sooner than later. But I want to read on here. In verse 3 and verse 4, it says, "When I kept silent about my sin, my body wasted away through my groaning all day long. For day and night thy hand, the hand of God, he means, was heavy upon me. My vitality was drained away as with the fever heat of summer." I got involved with drugs and alcohol at a very young age. Around about age 13, I started smoking marijuana and drinking on a fairly regular basis. And that went on for 20 years, all told. But during that time, it progressed into worse things. And by age 16, I was using hallucinogens and using barbiturates, as we called them back then, and different pills. And by age 20, I got out of school, I got a job, and I was working hard. And I was playing music and was in a band with some folks, and we sort of made a pact that we wouldn't live past age 24. That seemed to be when a lot of rock stars were dying back then in their early 20s. And it was a silly thing, but we were serious at the time. And suddenly I got to age 24 and realized my life wasn't over. And I was horrified. And I did try to take my life. Then I had tried on 3 occasions, that being the second one, and obviously I wasn't successful, praise God for that. But at age 24, I realized that everything I thought life might be was gone, and I was near 10 years into a severe drug addiction and didn't know what to do. But it says here in these verses we looked at that I was silent about my sin and my body wasted away. Through my groaning all day long, that's what I was doing. I was crying and groaning all day long, and I was wasting away. I worked in construction during that time, and we have a phrase I'm sure you've heard, the dog days of summer. And as June and July passed, and you enjoyed the heat at first, and then by the time August rolled around and the days were 90 plus degrees, you were just about ready for it to finish. Every day was very hot and very warm, and you just were so tired at the end of the day. And that's where I was for those 9 years. I was just living each day with the hand of God upon me. Looking back, I know that. I didn't know that at the time. I just thought that life was over. So I lived that way for a long time, and things didn't get any better. I wound up being arrested for drunk driving a few times, and was in jail, incarcerated for a while for that, and my wife was going to leave me, and many other things. My job was threatened, but I knew somehow that God had the answers. The God that I heard about when I was younger had the answers I was looking for, but I just didn't want to turn to him. Well, David goes on to say this in verse 5. He says, I acknowledge my sin to thee, and my iniquity I did not hide. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and thou didst forgive the guilt of my sin. That word confession there is, the root for that is to agree with. It's not just to tell what we've done. It's actually to agree wholeheartedly that the things we've done were wrong, inappropriate, and certainly against God. If you read in Psalm 51, you'll read about David confessing that as well, the same time that he wrote this psalm. But I did confess to the Lord. I finally, at age 33, broke down, and I couldn't take it any longer. I was in the shower, strange enough, after a drunken binge and being arrested, and went home to clean up because my wife said she was going to leave me. And so I went home and I cried out to God. And it was the same as I had done before in my mind. I had cried out to him many times. But somehow that time, it seemed to stick. Something seemed to happen where I got a bit of hope that things would change and things could get better. He says here that thou didst forgive the guilt of my sin. I had learned growing up in church some that Jesus, his shed blood would forgive my sin. I mentioned that earlier. But here David says he forgave the guilt of his sin. And I think that's a little different, because when you finish up a life, living a life of waywardness like I did, there's just piles and piles of guilt and shame. And nothing really can get rid of those for me. Yes, I could admit that God took them away and I no longer had to pay for the penalty of my sin. Jesus fulfilled that. But I still had to deal with the guilt and the shame of the things that I had done to God and to other people. But somehow at that time, he started to wipe that away from me. He started to let me know that I didn't have to carry these burdens any longer. And it took some time for those to dissipate. But I knew that he forgave those things, the guilt that I had. There's the word Selah there. We saw it after verse 4 as well. And that's a word that means to pause, or it also means a crescendo, sort of a build-up of things. And so David here, as he was writing this psalm, and as I think about my testimony, and maybe for yourself, if you can picture yourself in a similar place, you can stop after these points of life. You can find key points in life. For me, age 13 I began. At age 24, I had a change, a heart change, but not a life change. And then at age 33, I actually had a life change that went on. And so these are moments of Selah for me, moments of pause, thinking about how there was a marked change in my life that finally led to something good. He goes on to say this after that pause in verse 6. Therefore, let everyone who is godly pray to thee in the time when thou mayest be found. And he doesn't mean that godly, meaning you get everything right, because none of us ever have or ever will. But he means if you're thinking, as I did, that God has the answers for what you're looking for, he says pray to him now. Because while you're thinking about it, maybe you're doing that right now as you're watching this testimony, this is the time to pray to God and to ask him as well to come in and help you, much like he helped myself and helps many others throughout time and will. So he will be found in a time when you pray to him and ask him with all of your heart. But he goes on to say that surely in a flood of great waters they shall not reach him, meaning those things that trouble us will not reach us any longer. On that day, almost 20 years ago now, God said to me in the best way I could hear from him. I didn't understand what it meant to talk to the Lord as I do today, but back then he just gave me hope that I didn't have to drink anymore. I didn't have to take the drugs anymore in order to feel calm or feel good, or I didn't have to get away from myself any longer because I was learning to be happy with myself and happy with who I was. So those floodwaters never again reached over me. They came close and I saw them at times, but they didn't get there. He says in verse 7, thou art my hiding place. Thou dost preserve me from trouble. Thou dost surround me with songs of deliverance. I once heard a lady named Corrie ten Boom speak, and she was a young child during the occupation of Nazi Germany. And when the Nazis would come in to her home looking for people to take to the extermination camps, she would have recited a verse out of Colossians 3:3, she made this illustration that her life was her thumb, and she said her life was hidden with Christ in God. And she just reminded herself with her eyes closed of that great protection that she had, no matter what may come after her, that God was protecting her, God was keeping her. And she even said that even if she were to go and be killed as many of her friends were, she still would be protected in God. And I think about that today, how at that time when I was new to things of God, and even still today, I clung to him so desperately and remembered that that one that I cried out to and the one to whom I gave my life was in fact protecting me and insulating me from the things around me. There's a pause again to think about that David had, and just now we just spend a moment or two thinking about the great protection and strength of God that he offers to those who are in him. A few more verses we're going to look at and think about. He says, I will instruct you and teach you in the way you should go. I will counsel you with my eye upon you. And that's God speaking to David here. Thus far, David has been speaking out to God about that which was in his life, but now he's hearing back from God. And so as he confessed to God and as he unburdened his heart to God, God now is speaking back to him. God says this, and he says it to you and me as well. He will teach us and instruct us in the way we will go. He will tell us the things we need. And we certainly need to seek counsel from those around us. That's a good thing. But we need to learn how to hear from God ourselves and go to him. He says his eye will be upon you, and most versions should have the M capitalized on my, and that's reference to God. His eye will be upon us to show us the things we need to do and show us the places we need to walk to. He goes on to say in verse 9, do not be like the horse or as the mule, which have no understanding, whose trappings include bit and bridle to hold them in check. Otherwise they will not come near to you. Unfortunately, in these years that I've been with the Lord now and working in ministry with some folks, I see men and women who come to know him and walk through the same experience that David walked through, that I walked through, and maybe some of you have, and yet they're hard-headed and they refuse to receive the counsel that God gives, and God tries to help them to make changes in their lives. There's a phrase that some of you might have heard, to change people, places, and things, and folks refuse to do that. They still want to go do the same things, have the same relationships, and do the same things that they once did. And we can't do that any longer, because what happens is we no longer can do those things, and we're like a horse that has that bit and bridle in his mouth. And if you've ever seen that, you pull the ropes, whoever is riding, to tell them which way to go. So there's no freedom that they have to live in the way that they might like to live. And so they have to be instructed heavily by people and by strings, and we don't want that. And so if we can look to the Lord and give over to him and not be obstinate and hard-headed as I once was, then we can live in the ways that he wants us to live. Just finishing up with two verses, and verse 10 and 11, he says, many are the sorrows of the wicked, but he who trusts in the Lord, loving kindness shall surround him. Be glad in the Lord and rejoice, you righteous ones, and shout for joy, all who are upright in heart. He's reminding us, I was going through a difficult time about 5 years ago, and a brother of mine I was on the phone with, and he said to me, Psalm 23, we often hear that recited at funerals and such, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Follows me through green pastures. But the last verse 6, we all often look at, and that says that surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. And that's the man of God writing that, saying that God will be with me no matter what may be going on in my life. And David goes on to say that again here, that loving kindness shall surround him. So I want you to be encouraged today that as you look to the Lord and as you learn to walk in his ways, you can trust that his loving kindness will in fact surround you and protect you, just as he does for me and many others. And then lastly, he says to be glad and rejoice. He wants us to enjoy our life in the Lord. It's not a life of a bit and a bridle, just having us follow rules and a list of do's and don'ts, but he wants us to enjoy life and be happy in him. And he wants us to shout for joy, to proclaim his goodness to all who would hear. That's part of why I'm sharing this testimony today. This is my shout for joy, if you will, to God for what he's done for me and has been doing for me and is doing today. And he says, you righteous ones. I want to close with that. Righteous ones and the upright in heart, that isn't one who gets everything perfect. But the Bible teaches that through receiving Jesus and through his shed blood covering our sin, we have been made righteous in God's eyes. So because we are a Christian, if you are in fact, because I am today, I have been made righteous. So I can shout for joy not because I get it all right today, but because I know that through Jesus I have been made righteous in the eyes of God. And that's what he wants to do for each one of us. So I hope through this testimony and through the scriptures, you might have maybe related to some of my story or some of the story of David as he went through this difficult time after his own sin. It wasn't something happened to him. It was something he did himself. Yet the forgiveness of God and the fullness of God were made available to him either way. And so I hope that you might find some encouragement and draw upon that to get up and move forward in whatever it is that you need to do. And if God is speaking to you today, I would encourage you to call out to him in a time when he might be found. God bless you.